Another issue that dominated the 1970s was the Watergate scandal, which involved President Nixon. Just as the American people were close to finding out the truth of his involvement, he resigned, then was pardoned by President Ford. Was there a secret deal? Let's find out. First, here is a trial lawyer from the American Civil Liberties Union, Arnold Feinstein. Next, here's the 38th President of the United States, Gerald Ford. Welcome, gentlemen. Might I say, Mr. President, it is an honor to have you here today. Let's begin our questions with Mr. Feinstein. What do you think, Mr. Feinstein, is the worst tragedy of Nixon pardon?
One of the sadder chapters in American history is the period between 1972 and 1975. It is known as the Watergate era. It ended with Richard Nixon resigning from presidency. He faced certain impeachment proceedings and possible verdict of guilty. As the American public waited for our legal system to bring citizen Nixon to justice, President Ford granted him full pardon. Now the American public will never know the true story of the Watergate scandal.
What is CREEP and how does it relate to Richard Nixon?
CREEP is the committee to re-elect the president, and in 1972 they supported Nixon. They were caught bugging the Democrats' headquarters before their convention in 1972. CREEP has illegally raised tens of thousands of dollars to support their forgery, espionage, and sabotage.
But Richard Nixon never ordered them to spy on the Democrats.
Just how bad was this scandal? Didn't it end with other resignations besides Nixon's?
For more than 2 years, Richard Nixon defied the Constitution of the people by altering evidence, lying, covering up the crime, and probably committing many more crimes than the American public will ever know. This scandal is worse than the Harding or Grant scandals. Eventually, many of Nixon's top advisors were tried and found guilty. By 1974, 29 people related to the Watergate scandal were jailed.
Do you personally think there is enough evidence to convict President Nixon for any crimes?
Like I said before, for 2 years, Nixon defied the Constitution of the American people and altered evidence and wasn't submitting all the evidence that there was relating to the Watergate scandal. He prepared fraudulent income tax returns also. Finally, he could no longer prevent the tape recordings from being sent to the Oval Office.
What do you think of President Ford as a man, as a person, and as a leader?
He is the only president to ever attain office by simply a congressional vote. He was appointed vice president, then made president upon Nixon's resignation. Most people thought of him as a dim-witted football player, and this really showed it to the American public. Pardoning Nixon just made him look worse. First, he was elected as a president, he was rebuked by the citizens, and never made presidency.
I don't feel stupid for pardoning President Nixon at all. I feel as though America needed to move ahead and not be stuck on this Watergate scandal anymore.
Thank you, Mr. Feinstein, for sharing your concerns over this controversial act. Let's hear from President Ford and find out firsthand his feelings on this subject. How has Jimmy Carter viewed your pardon of Richard Nixon?
My wife and I, Betty, were deeply moved by Jimmy Carter's opening remarks in his inauguration when he said, "I want to thank my predecessor for all he has done to heal our land." He was referring to my pardon of Richard Nixon.
Do you feel sorry for President Nixon and his family?
I feel that everyone loves to kick Nixon around. Everyone knows about his dishonest nature, but still, having to resign from the presidency is more than a slight embarrassment for him and his family.
How can you help the nation by preventing a trial that would reveal the truth?
I feel as though a public trial for the president would have not been necessary. It would have served no constructive purpose. And with the pardon, I was trying to establish domestic tranquility. I feel as though the nation had suffered enough through the agony of the Vietnam War. And now we had to go through Watergate. I feel a trial for the president would have just further divided the nation.
But now the American people are divided over the topic of Nixon's actual guilt in the subject. So did it really save the nation from dividing?
How do we know you didn't make a deal with Nixon?
The pardoning of President Nixon cost me the 1976 election, so I would have not gotten reelected anyway. They voted for Georgia's Jimmy Carter, who was an unknown but yet honest man.
Isn't it true that you were just a victim of Nixon's superior intellect? Admit it, didn't he pull one over on you?
I don't feel stupid for pardoning him at all. We needed to allow America to move ahead, And with the pardoning, I feel as though we did. We needed to get off the topic of Watergate and move forward from Vietnam.
Mr. Feinstein, any final comments?
I feel like I've said what I need to say.
And you, President Ford?
Likewise.
We appreciate you, gentlemen, for shedding some light on this newsworthy event. Thank you, Arnold Feinstein and President Gerald Ford.